Thanks for not giving me anyone ugly to make out with. I appreciate
You know,
it.
Kid Rock, but Courtney Love is so much cooler than Kid Rock.
You're fucking perfect for me and my show.
And I'm not grandiose because I don't have overly grandiose ideas about my own fuckability. Thank God. All of the music is meant to be visually evocative.
OOMASOOMA, peace out. Welcome to Unshut, a place where if at any point you feel like you need to shut the up, don't.
Hi, hello, you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can. Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Great. Nice to meet you. Thanks so much for having me.
No, thank you so much for your time. What's your morning been looking like so far? Busy?
That's good. Well, I actually I'm doing a bunch of admin stuff. There's an actual today's like release day for the new single and then like the latest video. I just was creating copy for a bunch of stuff and then getting ready to hype it all over the place and then sort of apprehensively hoping that people watch it or whatever.
How do you do on release dates typically?
I mean, like, I don't know. In general, I'm pretty neurotic, and I mean, like, at this point, I've been around for long enough that I'm just hoping for the best, and you kind of can't really take it too personally. It also it varies. Like it varies a lot. So sometimes things will relatively blow up, relatively, and other times they just might not as much. And the whole point is not to have it somehow connect with my ego, like just like allow things to be what they are because I really have no control over. I only have a certain amount of control over it, and I can only. I probably shouldn't worry about it as much as I do, but this is the typical kind of vigilance of just having been on Instagram for the last like 14 straight years or whatever.
Oh, for sure. You're in New York City, right?
I am in New York City, yes.
Do you feel like that crazy rush of New York City, like it's such a fast-paced city, do you think that kind of plays a factor into when you put something out, that rush, like you're constantly busy, you're constantly putting up projects, and like you said, you've been doing this for a hot minute. So does that reflect that, you think?
Well, I mean, for sure. I mean, overall, like, because I grew up here, I moved away to go to college for a handful of years. I lived on the West Coast. I lived in Washington State for like the college years, and it been back since after that. The kind of general pace of franticness, the speed, the pace of this entire like my life here, probably like yes, it feeds into the level of just general sort of intensity and the pitch of the whole thing. Truthfully, I guess I'm old enough now that like I'm used to it because I grew up here and I've more or less lived here my whole life. But like in the last handful of years, I realized like I got to get out of here more often. I just have to leave for the weekend sometimes just because it's kind of true, to be completely honest. Like I'm used to it and it's actually worn me down. My psyche, the noise and stuff is like it's a little harder for me to handle than it used to be. But in general, like in terms of the general sort of feeling of movement and hype and intensity, yeah, it's commensurate with the level of energy that I'm hoping that the music is received with. I think I might feel different about it if I lived out in the woods or something. I don't know.
I will tell you this, I have enjoyed the past couple of weeks watching how you're promoting this stuff. It's very unique, very refreshing. I've got some questions about that we'll jump into a little bit later when we talk
Great.
about the tracks because I feel so honored to have been able to listen to the full length project, obviously before it drops. I'm super excited to pick your brain on some of those things, but I wanted to start off with asking you, what would you like me to refer you as? Tim, Timo?
Thank you so much. My name, I mean, I'm known as Timo, as it's per T-I-H. It's Timo, not Timo, which
Gotcha.
phonetically, thank you for asking. In order for people to not get it wrong, the majority of the time, I would have technically added another M. So would have the Timo sound. Just for the record, like my parents have been calling me Timo since I was like a day old. So I didn't make it up. I mean, legally I'm Timothy, but I've been known as Timo ever since I was like a newborn baby. But thank you for asking. So yes, I'm Timo with one M.
Amazing. So Timo, not Timo.
Thank you.
If I fuck it up later, just pardon me,
It's
okay?
totally fine. I'm used to it. And also depending on culturally speaking, some people with different accents just naturally say Timo. I'm not really getting on anybody's case about it, but if you're asking me, that's the historical correct pronunciation of the whole thing.
No, for sure. Now, I know with Umasuma being like your latest project, right? And hopefully
Yes.
I didn't butcher that name either. You've been doing this for a long time. So is the name Umasuma something that's been lingering in the background for all these years? Or how recent is it, even though this is a very recent project?
In this case, well, like Umasuma, like I had been releasing music for many years using my birth name, get my given name, Timo Ellis. In the absence of really doing like the regular practice and sort of the rhythm of creation, and that I have was primarily focused on the sort of art making side of it, relative to the conventional sort of marketing and release strategy of like making a record and doing 3 months of advanced PR and then doing a tour, or and then doing follow up several months of touring or follow up PR, and then waiting another sometimes 6 to 18 months to make another record, which would be the normal conventional sort of record business protocol. The thing about me is that like I think I have something of a hyper focus and like an obsessive art and music making practice. And so the much longer term practice that I've had has been about like just making records, maybe making like prior to the big streaming services, I would make short runs of CDs. I would make like I would actually make just like a little limited 100 like short, sort of like a limited edition like pressings, printings of them, and then sell some of them, but give most of them away, and not really primarily focus not only on pitching them but even marketing them. So I would end up the much greater emphasis of my whole practice was about like just making music. As a result of that, like I have a huge amount of back catalog. I have a gigantic amount of like completely finished solo albums. So the basically the story with you, Umasuma, is this: a few years ago, in the absence of having done PR or even properly like officially releasing things, I was like, you know what? I think I'd like to just try to rebirth the whole thing and reemerge using like a solo band name Avatar with a new energy. And so it was only the last couple of years. It was about 2 years ago that I started just kind of mentally freestyling about some kind of, like a name, a sigil, like the basic, like energetic, kind of like identifying marker for my whole world of solo music, something that wasn't my name and something that was kind of neutral and kind of just sort of evocative enough that it could be the umbrella for all of my hugely varied solo music, which ranges like where I could put out my death metal albums and also my Baroque, like progressive baritone ukulele albums, and also the classical music too, or whatever. I wanted something that was just kind of evocative and sounded a little gibberishy, and that was also just kind of a soft enough sound that it just had a nice feeling. So I guess to answer your question, I only came up with it a couple of years ago.
You explained it so beautifully because you actually answered my next question without me asking it. And I've talked about on the show how confusing an audience is so important for an artist, right? You're supposed to take, your audience into this journey. It's not supposed to make sense, right? I think that's part of the artistic delusion a lot of artists have. It's not supposed to make sense, but somehow it does make sense. And my question to you is going to be, what's something about this project that just made absolutely no sense, but somehow made sense, and you just fucking answered it? The name alone, it's one thing to bring this amplification of sounds that you have accumulated throughout the years of doing, music for so long, throwing it into one, but it's still so you. It's still the colors. Something I noticed was the way you wear socks. I know that's fucking weird, but I thought that it was very like cohesive to going back to your catalog of not being Umasuma, to how the name, the colors, they made sense with your fashion. They made sense with who you were. And even though it doesn't make sense, it made sense. So that's fucking awesome. I love it so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Beautiful. Thank you even so much for saying that. Like I really appreciate it. I mean, that's sort of best case overall kind of perception of the thing. I mean, the truth is that I have really hugely varied interests, and I have hugely varied musical tastes, and I kind of play multiple instruments. And I'm also like a longtime audio engineer, so I can like I have this like long-term practice of creating kind of somewhat radically different collections and albums, and ranging like a more or less a pretty radical range of aesthetics. I've also very much had it in mind from the beginning of like not trying to. I mean, the whole idea of genre fluid as a hook, as a kind of a framing device, that definitely is true for me, because it's like almost like fusion in like the truest sense of like genre mashup, and like trying to create collections of albums, like album collections, like narrative sequences that have like dramatic mood changes and also have style changes, but not in a way that's just like where I'm just doing it to be like zany, or I'm just doing it for the sake of just being like, look what I can do, because that's definitely not at all where I'm coming from. But like, as opposed to, well, not all the records are genre fluid. There are certain collections that I have that are tonally consistent. Like there's my country record, which sounds like a country record, you know? And then there's stuff that has more primarily oriented around dance music. And then there's some kind of like sort of garage noise punk, and then some classical, electronic classical music records, which within in and of themselves don't have, they're not as genre jumping all over the place. But then there's a handful of this, like Endless Future, which is the record that's coming out the day after tomorrow, is another one of those theses of genre fluidity where there's some dramatic style changes within the record, but overall on an emotional and psychological level, it's not like jarring. It's not like a like what's he doing? What the hell's happening? And I believe it. I mean, that's subjective. Maybe someone others might disagree with me. I don't know. But for me personally, the trick and the sort of the fun goal and the challenge is to be able to tell a story with varying style, varying aesthetic sensibilities in a way that actually psychologically is, that it allows the listener to get through the whole thing in a way that is pleasant and also is like a isn't like a jarring or doesn't it actually psychologically it makes sense, you know. And so that's something that I've always been interested in the beginning, is seeing how adventurous I can be in a way with playing with genre and storytelling styles within album cycles. I don't know if I answered your question. I just started riffing.
No, that's perfect. And now you've got me so fucking excited to when we do talk about the tracks because you said psychological, you've talked about fluidity, you've talked about just the adventurous side of this record. And let me tell you, you fucking nailed it, but I'm not going to geek out about it yet because I'm going to save it for last, okay?
Okay, great.
To be honest with you, I'm covered in goosebumps because I feel like you're almost connecting something I was wanting to talk to you about later. You're beating me to all of it. And I'm like, fuck. Again, we didn't prep for this interview. We haven't messaged each other back and forth. And so I think the alignment is just fucking spot on. In a previous interview, you had given a lot of answers that were yes and no answers. I wanted to start off with this. Are you a Gemini by any chance?
I'm a full-blown double Gemini.
Oh,
Yes.
fuck.
Yeah.
When's your birthday? Because I could not find that online
Oh
anywhere.
yeah, no, I mean I hit it. That's funny. Yeah, that's awesome. Like I'm June 7th. I'm June 7th, which is also whatever verse where the little fun factoid is it also happens to be Prince's birthday, even though it's not the same year. Obviously, I'm younger than he was. Whatever.
I wanted to ask you, what is something in your life typically that you like to do consistently to keep balance? Because that's what I took from your answers from that interview. It was your yes and no. I'm like, damn, he is very in tune with balance. You may not think so, but that was just the perception I got. What do you do to keep that sanity, to balance yourself out between the chaos of all these genres and creating a project?
Well, I mean, it's in a funny. This is something that I've kind of I think I've only discovered in the last couple of years. It's obvious in retrospect. You know, I know there in the cultural zeitgeist, there's definitely like a seeming like a sort of a widespread recognition of like neurospiciness, which is maybe it's actually it's very common. You know, it's much more common and prevalent than maybe sort of popularly speaking people had any idea. But for me, making music is a hyper focus. Making music is my way of regulating emotionally and psychologically, and it has been since I was 9 years old. And so my way of grounding my psyche, my way of grounding myself emotionally, psychologically, is with this practice of, and now it's like playing and recording and writing. That's also in part why I spent so much more time creating music than marketing it, because the marketing it's a different mindset and skill set, and also kind of just psychology and philosophical like way of of engaging with the world. Where for me, like obsessively bugging out in my cave in my home is my safe, super productive, super focused place. And so over the years, I mean, I'm someone that for other longer term reasons also as a teenager found great relief from drugs. And this is someone I've also like there's other like longer term normal types of traumatic family circumstantial stuff that would have naturally like kind of propelled me towards medicating and like from getting relief from substances. But I had a long term really terrifyingly out of control like history and experience of substance abuse. But thankfully I lived, and I've been sober for it'll be 17 years next month. But so anyway, to answer your question, so I stopped taking drugs. The way that I create balance actually, relatively speaking, is with my work practice, with my art making practice, and now finally like exercise. Like I just finally started doing like a little bit of the self-care stuff because I'm Gen X and like people like in terms of like there was the beginning of like jogging maybe when I was a child, but like in general there was when I was growing up in my family and in my culture there was no like there was no wellness culture. There was no self-care stuff at all in my life at all. And so it's taken me a long ass time to be like to even develop, and I kind of did it kicking and screaming. And I can't say I'm not like a super it's taken me a long ass time to even develop the discipline to be able to be like go to the gym. I'm also something of a completely insufferably passionate animal rights vegan now, which is also amazingly great. It's like that was another sort of spiritual awakening for me. So those are the practices. So basically, it's like, and I also love movies. I read a lot too, but primarily it's books, movies, making music, my own music, and then producing music for other people, which is what I do. That's my like whatever. That's my bread and butter is producing stuff for other artists, playing with other artists, producing music for commercials and TV and brands and and internet businesses. But yeah, to answer your question, the main thing is actually it's making music, which I do like every day. Like I have a pretty much like a blank canvas, like near religious discipline about making music. And then I've integrated in like drinking water, going to the gym, now. I started only like 4 years ago, and then eating and then going to bed, whatever, and like actually like regulating, like actually having like like cultivating discipline with the self-care stuff. Does that answer your question?
No, it does. And now I'm
Yeah.
also curious to ask you, sonically, when you look back prior to sobriety, right? Did that affect you sonically? Do you look back at your music catalog and do you see that there was a difference in what you were putting out in music wise? Or has the music truly always been somewhat, like you said, it brings you balance, right? It's what you're able to do to kind of calm the chaos a little bit. Are there similarities whether you were sober or not? If that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. Like the thing is that like in terms of like that kind of like a mind expansion, being like kind of like adventurous, even as a preteen, but also as a teen, and also when I took a pretty much like a heroic, bizarre, unbelievable amount of psychedelic drugs when I was a teenager, which of course affects your worldview, it obviously affects the your entire psychological, mental, and emotional sensibility. The thing is that like for me, especially being a hardcore, like a chronic pot smoker, like a former pot smoker, there's a level of like imagination, flights of imagination and dreaminess and kind of like a subjectivity that you can kind of explode sometimes when you're really baked and you can like shred, you can improvise and you can just be really awesomely imaginative. But that didn't happen all the time for me. Much more often at the time, I got paranoid and froze, and I would just get overly self-conscious. So I would say about 20 to 30% of the time, like my incessant pot smoking actually made, whatever generated some awesome, exciting, like pot sort of influenced or inspired creativity. But the much larger majority of the time, I was just kind of like exhausted and fucking, whatever, neurotic, paranoid, burnt out, tired, and then just fried. And then in retrospect, because I made a bunch of albums prior to getting sober, and some of that stuff, honestly, I stand by it. It's fucking. I mean, I think it's as good as anything I've ever done. The truth is that like it just took longer to finish everything, because you're like sleep a lot more, like being like having substance abuse issues and even being a hardcore pothead, you just makes you fucking exhausted. You have to sleep a lot more. And you also, you're just like, in terms of productivity, I don't know. There might be some super, super high functioning potheads that are like type A maniacs that fucking can actually just crush it in any profession, even when they're baked all day. But that wasn't the case with me. However, after I got sober, I mean, truthfully, there was a real sort of a profound worry and fear that I was like, oh my God, do I still have it? Can I actually still channel and function in like be a vehicle, vessel, a channel for all of my creative imagination without drugs? And within the first couple of months, I had some experiences which were like totally reassuring because I was like, oh, okay, yeah, thankfully my entire creative life wasn't dependent on that. It wasn't contingent upon being like, whatever drug use. At the same time, there's overall there's a level of intensity and of sort of abandon and fearlessness and wildness that, if I'm being completely honest, I did have as a drug user, that as a sober person, I'm just like I'm not as fucking crazy. I mean, I'm still crazy, but I'm definitely not as wild and out of just unbridled in a certain way as I was. And so sometimes I'm a little jealous of my former drug taking self, because there's some stuff that I did. I was like, holy shit, I was so fearless. There's a fearlessness that you can have. But even though I said that was not 50% of the time at all. It wasn't even near 50% of the time. But the truth is I, in the years after I got sober, and those, especially those first few albums that I made in early sobriety, had a like cathartic fucking, it was like an unblocking. Like, and also my writing voice, like all the lyrics, I felt a lot of shame. I felt a lot of shame about having as deep of as out of control as a drug problem as I did, which made for writing lyrics. I was blocked on like a writing voice level. And then when I got sober, it all came out. It was like a fucking avalanche of words and thoughts and feelings, and like and just ideas and writing, narrative stuff. So I'm not an advocate for substance abuse, but I am kind of an expansion person. And also, I can't, if I'm really being honest, like I did personally in my own estimation, believe I made some amazing shit when I was extremely deeply fucked up on drugs. But overall, I much prefer being sober. And I feel like the overall quality of focus, intensity, and the actual sort of clarity of my work is exponentially better as a sober person. Really the bottom line is like, it's been 17 years, and every day I'm like, I remember how fucking how crazy how it was. And so the novelty of sobriety after 17 years for me has not worn off at all. Like every day I'm like, I am so stoked to be sober. So that's just something worth anybody that's struggling with it, that's it's possible to not only beat it, to rise above it and grow out of it, but to actually thrive and like be way, 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 way happier than I ever was as a drug taking person.
Oh, and I think you're also
Sorry, that was a lot.
No, you're good, I promise. I love that this is also really good for, like you said, for anyone that's dealing with that, to also hear that it's okay as a sober person to go back and relive those dark moments while you were under the influence, because I sometimes feel like that is what creates a lot of fear in a lot of people when they're going through, these sober moments. They don't want to go back. They were obviously, and not obviously, I'm not an expert. No one come after me for it. There's a reason why a lot of people do suppress a lot of fears and a lot of, trauma with substance abuse. They don't want to live through it soberly. And when they do get sober, they're so afraid that revisiting why they were in those moments, they'll go back to those. And I think you're the perfect example of, it's okay to be sober, still go back and revisit those moments where you were, being reckless, whatever you want to call it, but still be able to take something from it and, for example, create something like music, tap into it in a very positive way. I think not a lot of people talk about that. And this is also refreshing for me because I'm not an expert in it. I don't know about sobriety or anything like that. So
For sure. And as much as like, obviously there's a huge spectrum of the kinds of like people that have really traumatic and maybe terrifying or really like profoundly they're traumatized by whatever they might have been, that like don't necessarily want to emotionally and psychologically like ruminate or really necessarily get hung up too much on that, and actually want to move on and grow through it. Without it's, I think it's positive. Again, this is another one of those things that, of course, it varies from person to person, and like as much as possible to like try to have a light touch about it and also have compassion for yourself, because to not because otherwise you could be whatever you could just be racked with remorse and shame and kind of just be sort of feel stuck. But as much as possible, one has to forgive themselves and remember all there is now, so to speak, as much as you can. It's easier said than done, but that's the idea.
no, absolutely. And since we're kind of talking about like self-reflection and the journey that comes along with it, right? This level of confidence that comes with it. You're talking about the joy that you're feeling, not going
Yeah.
back to those, and where you're at today in the present moment. When it comes to self-reflection and being able to really look at yourself in a mirror, right? When it comes to
Yes.
pitching your music, I know you talked about commercial uses for your music, and I know that you've done some stuff with like, Christian Louboutin, and you've done some ad space and stuff like that with them.
Five, six, seven, eight. Six, seven, eight, go!
Is it easier to pitch yourself than it is to pitch someone else's music, or is it harder for you at least?
The thing about making commercial music, it's like it sort of depends on the job, and what the expectation is. Like with the Christian Louboutin spots, I didn't really have to modify it enough to like too much to actually have it be like something that sounded like Depeche Mode. I wasn't really given explicit direction other than doing something that I thought would work with the visuals. But then a lot of times in like, especially in the commercial music business, someone might say, we want you to make something that's exactly like this Rolling Stone song, but like it can't be exactly like it because we'll get sued, but it has to evoke the same feeling. And so that's more like it's almost like an acting exercise. It's not really, I'm not really making my own. It's more of like an interpretation of an existing piece of art that's got to be close enough to evoke the same feelings, but not so close that you'll get sued. You can't use it. It's a different art. Actually a very specific artistic and creative process is making commercial music because it's got to be evocative, but it can't be so evocative that it overshadows the product. Or in this case, that also, it really depends also. But in terms of pitching stuff, I mean, if I'm pitching my own music, it's entirely my ass. It's in my mind. It's my vision on the line. And so it's also, you just got to have a thick skin because it's entirely subjective. I mean, like people like also may not listen to it. They'll listen to it according through their own aesthetic sensibilities, their own filter, and also depending on how deeply they listen to it or whatever, they might not, depending on what kind of mood they're in or whatever, or what their tastes are, things might not always be greeted with the best faith. It's also like you have to be willing to get panned, like to like, or ignored or not ignored and panned because I've been in the business for as long as I have. I don't take things as personally as I used to in the beginning because, it just hurts if someone like either rejects or just, kind of destroys or just basically like condemns your artwork and says that, like that. I think this sucks. And that's just, it's not easy to handle, because it is hard for your ego. But that's the grown up cold-blooded world we're living in. You have to just be willing to like not take it all personally, which also in the best case, like largest picture Buddhist sense means also not taking the good reviews too personally either, which is so much harder to do because we want approval. I want to be validated. I don't want to be rejected. I want to be accepted. So it's an ongoing process. Depending on my mood, I handle that better at some times than other times. In this case, yeah, I guess to answer your question, like pitching, I haven't really been actively pitching other people's music. I produce music for other artists who oftentimes like they do the pitching or they already have record deals. So I don't have to do the pitching part of it. And for my own music, it is just what it is. You just have to like, hope that if you present something to someone like a label or anybody, that it connects with them in enough of a way that they want to work with you. They want to support you in some way.
No, for sure. And I love that you were just talking about the good and bad reviews because I'm thinking in my head, here we go with the fucking balance we were talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Going through your Instagram, I felt like you had been pretty ahead of your time with a lot of things that you were doing. And I don't know if you have ever considered yourself that. I want to get your take on that. And I'm going back to something like photoshopping, the cartoons, almost like the avatarness of some of your art that you have put out, or even just the photoshops that you've done, the color schemes on, looking like an alien and shit. And I'm just totally freestyling this part right now because it's just something that just came to mind. You, in my opinion, have been so ahead of your time, not just sonically, but image wise. Have you ever considered yourself to be that?
Thank you. First of all, it's very nice. I very much appreciate that. To be completely honest, if anything, I skew towards like self-loathing as opposed to like grandiosity. I'm like, I am way ahead of my time. I'm like, in some ways, I've been doing things like I don't know. I mean, the answer, I guess the true answer is not really because I would never. I don't want to be grandiose. I don't. I want to be. I'm suspicious of if I start trying to shore up like this, like no one understands me. I mean, truthfully, I do feel like that enough that I'm kind of wary of it, that I want to try to manage it so that I don't like it's very it's I think it's easy for me because I've been sort of so actively like not really paying attention to trends like at all. Which is like I can say that like that is what it is. Someone be like, well, why? Why haven't you? I'm just not interested. And like I have, like I'm just saying, I've always been trying to make my own art. I haven't been just trying to like slightly iterate on some popular thing. I have my influences, which are more like genre influences as opposed to artist influences. I don't honestly anybody, I don't think anybody could really sort of accurately say, oh, he's just like this person, because that is not true. It's just not fucking true. At the same time, like I try not to get too hung up on that because I want to be so optimistic about it. And in my heart, I want people to the best case scenario would be to people to like kind of meet me where I am based on the sort of very specific thing that I'm doing. I'd like to think it's not actually radical. I'm just making my own artwork, but it's still quirky enough and it's kind of diverse enough and it sort of goes around over people's heads or around their heads. It's been doing that for long enough, especially with my band, because I have this other rock band, this weirdo rock band that I've also been playing with for a long time that also kind of confounds some genre expectations, like it just doesn't, it's not in an obvious lane. And there's also a lot of tonal variety with my band too, that I'm kind of used to being like, well, I'm kind of like, I'm over here. I'm adjacent to all these things that are happening, so sometimes I feel like if I look back on some of the records that I make a long time ago, they're still weird now. They don't sound like anything now, and they definitely didn't sound. I mean, they sound even less like things that were happening then. And so there's part of me that has some pride in that because I was like, I followed my own lights. You know what I mean? I kind of like, always wanted to be like intentional as possible about not playing into the gallery and not trying to do something that I thought would automatically work, which is nothing. I have no critique of that whatsoever. I have nothing. I'm not above it. I just, that my natural inclination has always been to try to see if I could actually make something that was demonstrably unique. In a way, I feel like there's sort of less of a, I don't know, this might be a little, I don't want to be judgmental. This might be my own critical take on the whole thing. I feel like there's never been less of a cultural urgency for people to try to be original. There's less now than there used to be. And like, this doesn't mean that there aren't people making original music, because there are. But on a cultural level, it's like, it's more okay just to be like, I'm going to for an artist to be like, I'm going to make a record that's exactly like Drake, like uncritically, and just like do that. And I'm like, why would you want to do that? But then again, I have to make money, and God bless you, whatever. I mean, I get it. I'm not going to be like, don't do that, but that's just not where I'm coming from.
It's so perfect and so spot on. And this is why I was so excited about this because, well, I have a couple of stories for you that, again, I'll save for later. And probably one I'll tell you off record because it is fucking trippy. But I will tell you this, when it comes to the genre mixing and the genre fluidity that you talk about, it's so spot on. And this is why I thought you would be so perfect for me. And I've talked about this early on in the show. A big part of the premise of the show was to showcase diversity because I never made a lot of sense to a lot of people. I was a choreographer who was doing choreography to hip hop, to cheerleading, but I love ska punk music. I love cinematic music. I love funk. I love R&B. I love techno. I love pop. I'm a trendy bitch, but I'm also not very trendy. My style alone, it always confuses a lot of people. I'm very feminine, but I can be hood as fuck too. So it's never made sense. And so this is why I've been kind of geeking out about you, because going back to what we talked about, sometimes what doesn't make sense to a lot of people, it makes sense to the few of us that really do resonate with it. And eventually, that is what creates longevity for someone to be doing this a long time. And I don't think so many artistic people are out there looking for like their big break. I mean, a lot of them are, but I
Yeah.
do think that sometimes a quick break is not as substantial as a break that you finally fucking get after years of putting in work that didn't make sense to a lot of people. So that's
Yeah.
why, in my opinion, you're fucking perfect for me and my show.
Beautiful. Wonderful. Well, cheers. Thank you. Beautiful. Good on you too. I mean, awesome. That's amazing. Thank you for even like articulating that way, because I appreciate that, and I appreciate you too. So amazing.
No, of course. And something I wanted to do with you real quick, because I'm also very known, not super well known, but I'm fucking getting there because I create a lot of traction on a weekly basis with the premise of the show also being asking guests questions they've never been asked before. And I know for a fact with you, I'm gonna catch you off guard with some shit, and I'm super excited about it.
Great.
But this is going to kind of segue into that. I've got some pictures because we were talking about your Instagram, the photoshopping, and all that stuff. This is going to segue into that. I'm going to show you some images from your Instagram, and I want you to tell me if those were the album covers, what that album would be called. Are you ready?
Okay. Sure.
All right. Here's the first one.
Oh my God. That's amazing. That's a Oh my God. If you look at that one closely, if you can take a look, it says, "My wife tried to kill our artistic child."
Where does it say that? Oh,
On the
it
right
does.
side. If you know me, anybody that knows me, like it couldn't be any farther away from my actual sensibility. But at the same time, I'm just having fun with the idea of being like some ultra slick, like beefcake, kind of like openly, ragingly narcissistic person. It would be like as if maybe, or if only. To me, like my head on that body, the thing about me is like for good natured and positivity and stuff, like internally, I'm like Shrek. I'm like an ogre. Like, so that's like, it's like, when it's like, it would be like something that involves Shrek. That would be the album title of that. Yeah.
Too funny. I've got the next one for you, and I'm curious to see what you would name this one. Are you ready?
All right. Yes. Oh my God. See, these are things that I made that they're taking the piss on, like dating profile pics. Honestly, there's these really like obscenely ridiculous stylized, like over the top fantasy like projections of like, like a perfect like sort of cis masculinity or whatever it is. But that one particularly is like it's like end times vacation. That one.
Perfect. The next one.
Whoa. I don't know if that's from a video or a screenshot, but that's just like I was kind of playing around with like facial hair, like mustache world, which is also that again, it's another kind of like it would be called mustache fail, maybe.
Perfect. Are you ready for the next one?
Sure. Oh yeah, those are good. Yeah, that's me. Like I mean, truthfully, I'm kind of exploiting my college age hotness, but also I'm just silly. I'm just taking the piss. It's like it just because honestly, it's like every one of those guys is like a doofus. They're all fucking like the kind of knuckleheads. So that would be called like like a gallery of doofus.
Perfect. The last one I have for you is one of my favorites because I thought it was the coolest foreshadowing to this music lover that you have become and that you still are to this day. So the next one, I'm curious to see what you would title this as the album cover.
Yeah, that's awesome. If you want to, if again, that's in my actual childhood bedroom, like in New York City. I would say like, and also you can see there. I think in the back there's a Leonard Skinner poster and a Rush poster, maybe, or Led Zeppelin in the back there, and also maybe the Go-Go's. Do you see I don't know, it might be the Go-Go's, which gives you a sense of like Leonard Skinner and the Go-Go's. It should tell you something about like the level of like a variety and also just of interest that I had. But I was like, I would call that one like, please give me some drugs. I'm waiting for the drugs. I was
Waiting
like,
for the drugs.
yeah, I'm saying like drugs, please, ASAP.
What's so genius about that, and the reason I wanted to ask you about album covers was because you had talked about it on an interview, and you've done quite a few, but this one was one of my favorites. I believe you were his first returning guest, and I didn't write it down, but it was just such an awesome interaction between the two of you. But you talked about how you had this idea to create a 20-hour long album, but it's just something super long, but you wouldn't do it. Do you know what interview I'm talking about?
I think so. It might be with my friend Mike Squires, who does couch riffs. Is that possible? Yeah.
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah, he's
Yes.
great.
I was curious about that because when you talked about that and you guys were joking about that, I was literally thinking in my head, well, his new project could have been a 20-hour album because it's so cinematic. So now I'm curious to also follow up that comment and that question with, if you did put out a 20-hour lengthy album, what would that title be?
Honestly, it's actually funny. It would be something I've had like, like the winds of Umasuma. I don't know. The truth is, it's funny, interesting. I'm trying to remember generally my entire body of work. In a way, it's like one long album. Like that's kind of like like it's my life's work is like one. It actually is closer, a kind of a narrative level. Like the each album does lead into the next one, like as the next story element, the next scene, the next movement, or like a show that has 25 episodes, like a streaming, like a series, like a TV series. It's closer to actually conceptually being kind of like imagined in a way. So there is a kind of like longer form concept actually in a way, even though I didn't have that in mind at the time, but in retrospect, it kind of actually really does work like that, and because each album, even though there are many cases are radically different, like the mood changes. Like one of my minimalist, like ambient electronic records gets followed up by like a brutal, murderous, near like death metal noise punk album, but then gets followed up by the country album and then another weirdo electronic album. But on a personal level, they were all the next thing. I mean, obviously, it's like they're the next. I was not thinking at all in terms of marketing, like at all. I'm not really thinking about like to a certain degree. I mean, in a way, this is sort of for better and worse. I kind of didn't really have the audience in mind at all. Like I was just kind of like, what am I doing next? It's like the creative God, muse. The muse is like just saying like, okay, like what am I feeling like doing next? Usually I never want to make the same type of thing again. It's almost like I want like a tonal, emotional, dynamic. I want it to be dynamic. I wouldn't make like two albums that had a similar feeling in a row, in a way, because on an unconscious level, I had it in mind to like try to, if someone were to actually listen to my whole fucking body of work in order, then it would be like, oh, they would be like, it would be a different direction. We'd be like, it's supposed to be refreshed. It was supposed to be like enlivened by like a different fucking mood, The long-term concept is something that I'm actually seriously thinking about a way to actually put out all of my records, because it's like it's years and years of, I can put out a lot of music. I mean, what remains to be seen. I don't really want to diffuse my intention about it because I haven't figured it out yet. But in a way, like the truth is, I actually am sincerely working on the winds of projects.
No, for sure. Well, if you did, you've got one listener right here, baby, because I love the concept and I love the fact that each track on this new project, which we're getting ready to talk about soon, you really did create this like transcending sound. It almost made me personally want it to be longer. So thanks for doing the
Beautiful.
whole album covers things with me. I'm super excited that you
Yeah.
went along with it. However, we couldn't talk about album covers, past images, Instagram, or anything like that without talking about Shame Party. So this
Oh
is
yeah,
going to
awesome.
be the rapid question part of it before we actually do talk about your new project. But
Okay, great.
are you
That's
ready
awesome.
for it?
Yes.
The first one is, and this is just me pulling inspiration from those episodes you did, which, by the way, bring them back. They're iconic. And one of the other reasons why I thought you were ahead of your time. These are random. They're not supposed to make sense. Some will, some don't. If having a panic attack made you take your clothes off, is sex just another word for panic?
For me personally, no. Panic attack will make me take my clothes off. In my case, it would be probably because I'm having like possibly a cocaine induced like a neurological freak out. So in those moments, I was not feeling sexy.
Perfect. The second one. If you had to pick a member of Kiss to make out with me and use the kissing sounds as background sounds in a song, which band member am I making out with? And this came from the episode you did where you asked someone about Duran Duran.
Oh, I have to go with 70s Ace. Ace is by far the coolest and in a certain way the most beautiful and also seemed to be the least obnoxious in a way. And he's also a ripping fucking guitar player. Plus, he just looks beautiful. He was kind of the most beautiful.
Well, thanks for not giving me anyone ugly to make out with. I appreciate it.
You know,
In an episode, you talked about one of the Scorpion members being fuckable. Who's the most fuckable member of Netherlands?
well, I'm gonna have to go with me.
There you go.
In a way because I only have one. There's a host of there's a kind of rotating cast of other drummers. But actually, they're all very charismatic and very attractive dudes. I don't know if they'd want to be like I don't know if they'd want to be associated with they might not mind, but I'm gonna take the hit on that one. And I'm not grandiose because I don't have overly grandiose ideas about my own fuckability. Thank God.
The next one I have for you is if Courtney Love did in fact become our next president, who would be her vice president?
Oh no, because she's cooler than that. My initial thing was going to say Kid Rock, but Courtney Love is so much cooler than Kid Rock. Yeah, I mean Kid Rock's a malevolent clown, and I'm sorry, he's the worst. So I'm sorry for even bringing him up. It's horrible. Yeah, someone like Dua Lipa, maybe. How about that?
All right, that's perfect. Listen, as long as it's
Yeah.
not Kid Rock, I think we're good. Dua Lipa for the record, I love it. Fun fact about Dua Lipa, I just recently tried, she did this video where she did like Coca-Cola with pickle juice. It was fucking awesome. It tasted good. So I know you're probably not as unhealthy as me when it comes to trying something like that. But if you did feel spontaneous in honor of this little segment, have some Coca-Cola with pickle juice. It's fucking good.
Whoa. Okay, I at least consider it. I would take a sip. I don't know if I prepare it, but if it was there, I'd give it a shot.
Oh, for sure. The last one I have for you, whether sex should or should not be sexy, what is foreplay?
I mean, for me, it's like hot conversations, hot philosophical conversations. At first, I was going to say something abstract and absurd, like filling out forms. Like, you have to fill out the proper forms, and then you can have hot conversations that may or may not lead to sex, and it might lead to you arguing and then walking away from each other.
Or a panic attack. Who knows?
Yeah. Arguing and then the panic attack and then like walking away from each other.
Exactly. Thank you so much for doing that with me because I do take a lot of pride in making sure that my guests are caught off guard in a pleasant and fun way. I don't want to always just do interviews that's like, congrats on the new project. What's your favorite song? How did this come about? How did you write this lyric? And I really do like to catch guests off guard with this because it's also how I get your creative mind going. So thank you so much for doing that.
Great. Of course, thank you for doing it. I really appreciate it too. I mean, honestly, for a second there, I was like, don't know what he's going to pull out. It'd be weird because I have a lot of weird shit out there.
You do, but I love that about you so much. And so that's why this was so perfect because I've noticed in a lot of your other interviews, yes, they're great interviews, but they don't always bring up shame party. They don't bring up the socks and the quirky things about you that I absolutely loved when I was deep diving into you. Hopefully with some of these questions, you've never been asked on record before. So
that's true. That would be all of them. That would be many of them. All of those for sure.
Hell yeah, I love that. Well, lastly, I want to talk about your new project. First of all, congrats, because I absolutely love it. It's 10 tracks, 10 amazing tracks. And I wanted to get your feedback on my feedback. So the opening track on this project, I kind of journaled while I was listening to them. And the first word that came to mind was haunting. How do you respond to that?
Well, yeah, in that case, it's called blonde metal. It's evocative. It's a little mournful. It's kind of like a choral Muppet song with this murderous black metal chorus. It kind of sounds like a sad Muppets with a Death Heaven or Slayer as the backing band. I've never made anything like that. I've never heard anything like that. But Haunting is beautiful in as much as that it's got one lyric which just says he died. That's the only lyric. And so in that respect, it's just supposed to be evocative of some mysterious, he that died.
Do you consider this project in full length to be cinematic? How do you feel about that word?
Yeah, no, I mean, very much. Thank you. I just want to qualify one thing. But I said the Muppets. The song's not fucking funny. it's actually entirely serious. I'm just saying that there's some interesting tonal combinations of things, and I'm just using the Muppets. It's the closest one to a chorus of seemingly dreamy, positively inflected chorus of voices that gets violently interrupted by like a fucking black metal band. So, but I'm just saying, it's not comedy. That song is, it's deathly fucking serious. So haunting is appropriate. Cinematic for sure. I mean, in a way, like all of the music is meant to be visually evocative. It's all explicitly intended to try to evoke imagery. So yes, I would say 100%. Cinematic is my stated sort of mission, my goal with all of it.
That's amazing. I know that 3 years ago, you discussed in an interview when it came to writing your lyrics or composing your music, it was very improv style. For this project, was that also the style? When it came to creating even just the sounds, did you improv it? Did you just go with what was intuitively your instinct, or was the approach to this different than what you said in that interview 3 years ago, if that makes sense?
The entire thing is actually all improvised. It's all seat of the pants. But in many of the cases, and over half the record, I just started with a beat. I did a drum figure first and then ended up just layering other and basses and keyboards and guitars and vocals and percussion and all the stuff, intuitively as the kind, it's almost like a sculptural process. It's like the kind of form, the vibe. In terms of lyrics, I always do those at the end. And I usually start off with phonetics, which is a common thing where I'll try to come up with a melody. I'll freestyle a bunch of melodies and then I'll kind of refine that down. Even if I'm just singing sounds, I'll end up kind of trying to kind of find words that kind of approximate the sound that I felt was the closest to what it should be over this part. And then sometimes like phrases, like sentences or even words or phrases will start to kind of manifest. They'll start to reveal themselves. And then like, oh, this song could be about this. And it's sort of like reverse engineering a little bit, but it's entirely done spontaneously on the fly. I mean, sometimes I'll be like, I'll have a sentence or a vocal, like a title, and be like, oh, that's a cool title. And then I'll be like, I'm going to try to write a song thematically that I can reverse engineer from that idea. But most of the time I don't do that. Yeah, it's entirely spontaneous. I'm making up the entire thing as I go along, basically.
And I love that because then you don't start to get in your head and overthinking the project or overthinking the track. And then you don't sit on that creativity for too long and then it just kind of dies out. So I love that you did that for this project as well. If I'm not mistaken, you said this will also be available on CDs. You're printing some sort of copies of it, but what about vinyls? How else would it be accessible?
I made 100 CDs. I'm only making 100. They have beautiful cover art. They have the lyric sheet. They have all this photography and stuff. And they're beautiful. And also, just as a matter of fact, they contain two songs that are not on the album that are actually part of the original sequence that I kind of like, whatever. There's an element of marketing, whatever, it's marketing bullshit, being like, these two songs are only available on the CD. So it was done for that reason. But the truth is, these songs actually work. I can't wait for you, particularly, to hear them because they change the narrative feeling. They're in the first act. They're in the first third of the album. And then vinyl, like, it would have to be determined by popular demand, and like, of course, obviously, I will, thankfully, I believe, sell out these first 100 CDs, although get them while they're hot when the link comes out, because they are going to sell, and plus, as I said, they have two extra songs. But vinyl, you have to roll off bass frequencies to master for vinyl, and people play vinyl in their houses on like hi-fi systems, and like, I'm a bass fanatic. It's like, bring the pain. Like, I want people to play these fucking songs on like club systems with like maximum bass. Like in other words, in dance clubs, like you can play vinyl records and they don't feed back because the turntables are far enough away from the speakers that they don't feed back. But for normal, like regular at-home consumers, as cool as it is, and plus with the artifact, with the actual tangible artifact, with the pictures and the liner notes, I am from that generation that loves that stuff. At the same time, I don't like the fact that the bass gets rolled off. And also, to be completely honest, vinyl is sort of environmentally indefensible. Like, in a way, like, it's like, longer term, all of this stuff's going to end up in a landfill. So you try not to maybe add more vinyl to the world. I know that's a hot take. I'm sure basically no one would agree with me about that, but I think I have some guilt about being like, should I make vinyl? Because like, it's other than maybe some new technologies or whatever, vinyl like is so difficult to. It's actually not possible to recycle. You can't recycle vinyl. Like they say, like make an ashtray out of it, like make a frisbee out of it, or make art. That's. But if for some reason I can come up with it, there's a technical way to make vinyl that isn't like environmentally hideous, I will do it because I love the packaging and stuff too.
Well,
Sorry,
good
I'm
to
such a
know.
nerd.
No, you're good. That's so exciting. That's really good to know. And yeah, I cannot wait. And I'm also excited to see how it does change the vibe that it gave me on you said it was in like the beginning part of it. So I
Yeah,
am
of
curious to check it out. I cannot wait. So thanks for talking about this new project with me as well, because
course.
I love it. I got to hear it before it's out to the world. So I felt fucking cool about it. The last thing I want to do with you, because again, it's not only just about asking questions that you've never been asked before, but sometimes that also means doing something you've never done before. And I figured you would be funky enough to do this with me. So hopefully it doesn't scare you off, but it's the last thing we're going to do anyway. So if you hate it, just end the call and get out of the camera. The last thing we're going to do, how we're going to wrap up this interview, is you're going to say "OOMASOOMA" out, or "OOMASOOMA" peace out, whatever. But this is going to be our outro to this video call, okay?
Great.
We're going to honor the show segment that you were doing, the shame party, okay?
Okay.
And you did all these crazy voiceovers.
First of all, just why can sex or should sex be sexy?
However, we're not going to be using voiceovers. So I want you to give me your best "OOMASOOMA" out in whatever fucking voice you want, and I'll do the same.
Before I do that, just for context, Shame Party is like my 1 minute conceptual talk show. It's like a surrealist talk show where I interview a bunch of weirdos and all my freaking artist friends. That's just a 1 minute talk show. So that's what we're talking about.
But yeah, this is going to be the last thing we do before we end the call. So thank you so much. This was so much fun. I can't wait for this to air.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This is wonderful. Really, I really appreciate your thoughtfulness and the level of depth of the whole thing. Honestly, peace. And anybody that's watching this, take care. Peace. Uma Suma out.
"OOMASOOMA" peace out.
Peace out.
Hey, if you've made it this far, don't forget to follow the socials on the screen or in the description below. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel. See you next week.